So I figured this was the easiest way to get information to you about what I need done today, if you can. Here we are on the development site, offshoresearch.html. I'm going to go ahead and show you how it currently looks. If I enter Sajetti's Minneapolis address and foot, as you remember, things are pretty slow right now, so you have to wait for it to show up. There we go. So if we click on orthopedic surgery, the first entry there, under specialties, we'll wait for this thing to load. And you can see already before it finishes loading, here's where network appears right now. It's collapsed by default. That's one of the things I'd like to change. I'll explain the details in just a minute. But the more important thing we'll see as soon as this finishes loading up. There we go. All right, so if we expand specialties, now this is when the user is in what's called the anonymous state. We know nothing about the user at this point. We don't know their group, their subgroup, they're not authenticated, they haven't come in on a vanity URL. So at this point, network appears right below location. And the network area includes both this image of the ID card and the text, and it includes the actual drop-down list for networks. So that's pretty normal. What we've added is a tier drop-down, which applies only to certain networks, and a year drop-down, which applies only to certain networks. Let me switch over for a moment here and show you the sample. Well, let me actually show you here. Show you the sample data that I've got coming back for this case. And what you'll see in the metadata section, once I get to it, you can tell I haven't set this up. There we go. There's networks here. So notice this particular group has 3 different networks, MN1E, MNL9, and MNK1. The MN1E, which is the default network that we select from the drop-down list because isDefault is set to true and the other 2 are set to false, has no plans and has no years. However, if we were to pull down to the MNL9, we'd see a tier level of 1 available to us to filter. And if we pull down to, also the same is true for this plan MNK1. Now, knowing that, let's go back here and look for a minute and say that with Blue Devil Alliance, which had no tiers and years, these are empty. And here's the first problem that we need to fix. Either of these drop-downs need to be suppressed if there's nothing to fill into them. So if, as you saw here, for the MN1E network, tiers is blank and years is blank, then what needs to happen here is this and this pull down just need to completely disappear. These need to be suppressed completely. Now these are dynamic, so if I go to the skull and crossbones health, clearly changing the network will do a new request, and we'll wait for that to finish. And what you'll see coming back here is a case of at least a tier. Now this is a real thin set of test cases that I've got in the I guess we got back 2 for this one, sorry. So the example I was showing you wasn't quite accurate, but we have got a tier here, and we have no years. So in this case, years should be still suppressed. Tiers should not. And because we've got at least one of these, well, let me stop and say that this is a bad example. We would never have just one tier. We'd have more than one. I don't think we want to select a default tier. I think we want to leave the option of select a tier set, no matter how many there are here, to draw their attention to the fact that we want them to select a tier, either 1 or 2, to complete the selection process. I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, give me a shout about that. Now, again, this is where it appears, and this is how it appears when the user is anonymous. Now, how do we know that the user is anonymous? Well, we know that because in the constants file, constants.js, there is a new value called user state, and it can have 1 of 4 values: anonymous, vanity group, or authenticated. We're doing our testing here with anonymous, so if there is the user state set to anonymous, then this is what's supposed to happen. If the user state is set to anything other than anonymous, either vanity group or authenticated, here's what should happen. And it's not working right now, so I'm going to have to explain it to you. What should happen is that this entire network filter area you see here should go down back to its normal place, which is below the more options. So network will appear down here at the bottom, back where it used to be below more options. So there is a positional difference between anonymous and the other 3 non-anonymouses. The other difference is that when we are non-anonymous and we're moving this network block down to its regular location, we also do not show the ID card image or the text. So that's one of the other changes that happens. Hope that makes sense so far. So this entire block will move down to being back to where it was, which is below more options. We will not see this piece of it that I'm circling right here. We will still see the drop downs. Network, of course, will always appear, and as I requested, tier and year will appear only if there are tiers or years to select. So that's what should happen there. You can test that by changing the value of user state in your constants.js file. Now, how this will work in the real world is that the portlet code that Ben is writing for us will manipulate this variable as he sends us the constants.js file. So if the user state changes, he will modify this value in the constants.js file before we get it. So we know that value will always be the proper one. It's set for us by the portlet. We just use it to determine what state the user's in and take actions. And the only action we're taking right now is this network. There is one other I'll explain in just a moment. Okay, now, here's one thing that I skipped. Notice that up here in the network, in the anonymous case, we've also got this group, subgroup, and search button. Now, this will always appear whenever this ID card appears, because what this ID card is a call to action explaining to them where they will find their group and subgroup. This is not fully changed yet, but we will tell them where on the ID card they will find it. And in reality, just so you know, a group number will be this EP869 and the subgroup will be GA. So we'll do a further call to action here that will allow them to fill their group and subgroup in and click search. And if they've entered a valid group and subgroup, which the backend software will validate, then that is a case under which the portlet code will change the state from anonymous to group, meaning non-anonymous. And the code that you're going to do, because it's now non-anonymous, will move this network block, suppress the ID card in the image, and also suppress this group, subgroup ID form fields and the search button. Okay? So in other words, if we're in the non-anonymous state, we know something about them, it'll be the network thing it always used to be. Network, the network pull down, and now the tier and year. Whereas if it's anonymous, we'll move it up here. We'll include the ID card image and the call to action. We'll include the group, subgroup ID, text fields, and the search. Okay, hope that all makes sense so far. Now, here's what I need you to do for that. Once you get this all set up, please just make sure that clicking the search button calls the URL that will handle validating this address and the group subgroup, sorry, and will set the user state variable as it's supposed to be. And what I'm going to show you that is, let me just look here for a second, that when we do this, I'm going to look at search results.js. If I go back to constants for a minute, you will see this addition up here called network form URL. So this is a difference. This is what it calls when this button is clicked after filling in these fields. What I prefer to do, by the way, is let's do, if we can, some validation checks as we set this button. If they haven't filled these fields in, let's not allow the button to be used. If they do fill these fields in and we actually validate against what this particular form should be. We want 5 characters and we want 2. 5 for the group ID, 2 for the subgroup ID. I'd at least like to do that level of validation in the UI code, in the JavaScript. So this will call, clicking that button will call that, and if I look here, you'll see this, is that it forms an action which includes the base URL plus a page name and then adds the group and subgroup to them. So these are parts of the query that the query string that the code on the other side will parse apart and figure out. Now right now this doesn't appear to work as it's written. So there's some work also that needs to be done there. It's because if I click search, nothing actually happens. So we need you to work on that as well. If you get it working, I think that you will get back just the same, as a result of submitting, nothing will actually happen, the state will not actually change, and you'll get back exactly the same HTML, but I'll take it from there. So at least if you know that this form action gets called, this network form URL gets called, I'll take it from there once you hand the code back over to me. I'll do the work on my side to validate it and then send the proper state. and then it'll switch it from showing here to showing down below. All right. I think there's only one other thing I need to point out here, which is that while you won't see it here, I think we will see it on my page. Let me do a refresh here. Let me also do a refresh here, and I want to show you one other thing. There's a disclaimer area that is supposed to be based on the user state. So let me make sure the user state's set properly here. Okay, I don't see the disclaimer appearing right now. We'll worry about that a little bit later. But there is a network disclaimer that's supposed to appear up here if the user is in the anonymous state, and you may see it in the source code for the search results page. And it's an ad up here that essentially calls the user to action to say, look, we've noticed we have no information about you. We're just giving you the standard list of networks. If you can find information that will help us validate further, group, subgroup, or a vanity URL, or fully logged in, you'll get a better search experience. So that'll be an ad that appears up here only for the anonymous state. Okay. Now there's one other subtlety that wasn't handled properly in the requirements, which I'm going to go ahead and make an executive decision. And we notice that, like these others, location and specialties and so on, there's an expand collapse here. As I said, when we first land this page, it's collapsed. I want the default to be expanded like all the other ones are. But in addition, and I'm going to suggest we put it right next to it here, there is a standard helper or information glyph that we can put right here. What we want that to do is to expand or collapse this area, the ID card plus the message. We want it to expand or collapse this to move it out of the way. By default, we want this to be collapsed, so that when they land on this page initially, the entire network area is expanded, but this section that has the ID card and the text is collapsed and is expanded if they click on the information glyph. And the idea is to keep the screen simple, but provide a call to action visually that if they click the information, this will show up and it will provide them some guidance as to how the group and subgroup are supposed to be done. Okay, I think I've done enough talking. That's it. This information that you're seeing right here, this page that you're seeing right here, is what is in offshore. This is also what's checked into SVN. So if you want to check out SVN and work on it, feel free to deploy to offshore today. I think you remember that the deployment process is still the same as it's always been. You have a deployment capability here. You can also still deploy to your Scarlet environment if you want to do your work there. I think that's pretty much it. If you've got questions, give me a call. I'll be around working today because I've got to get some documentation ready for the portlet architecture. Thanks very much for your help. Talk to you later.